So August really did slip away, and I'm not gonna lie to you, this year I am not sad to see it go. Now, I had a whole lot of things planned for August in terms of grandiose ideas for videos and for us to engage about books, and those obviously did not happen. Hopefully I can carry some of those over into September, though at the end of September I do have a vacation coming up, and so we'll see what happens. However, we do need to obviously today talk about the books coming out in September. So hi, my name is Melody. Whether you have been here before or not, my name continues to be Melody, and we continue to talk about books and book adjacent things on this channel, and I would love to have you hanging out with us and with me here more if you feel so inclined. So today we are going to dive in to the books coming out in September. Now, the last couple of months, I have gotten a little long-winded about the anticipated releases, ignoring of course that I completely skipped July. So I'm gonna try and keep it a little tighter this month, though we do have some releases I am very excited about. Now, historically, September, October, the fall season is really big for new releases, but as we've discussed over the last couple of years, it feels like every season has kind of become big for releases. We're even seeing releases pushing through December in a way that historically, especially when I was a bookseller, I don't remember seeing as much of that. But that being said, we are right smack dab in the middle of a lot of big releases. Now, this month is a little bit more tailored down even than usual, so as always, let me know what you are excited about below, whether we talk about it today or not, so that we can all know what is on the radar for new books this month and be excited about books together and hopefully, ideally, find some great new reads. And with all that being said, let's go ahead and jump into September 3rd, which is the first new release Tuesday of September and is thrusting us into one of the reoccurring themes I think we're going to see through September and October, especially as we reach the kind of height of spooky season for reading, but a trend that I think we have been noticing, especially on this channel this year especially already, and that is vampires. We are getting Elusive by Genevieve Cogman, which is the sequel to Scarlet, which I still have not read my copy of. I need to prioritize, especially because I didn't realize it was going to be a series, which is a lot of fun. And Scarlet and Elusive are vampire retellings of the Scarlet Pimpernel. Now, I love the Scarlet Pimpernel, and I need to reread this before I read Scarlet and Elusive as well, so I can get a sense of how we're playing with this, because it seems like, based on the flipping through the books I've done, or the book I've done, and reading the blurbs, Percy is going to be active in this world, and I want to see how they're in communication with each other. I read the Scarlet Pimpernel high school, college, I don't remember. I bought it because I had been a big fan of The Secret History of the Pink Carnation series when I was a teenager, which is very obviously a riff on the Scarlet Pimpernel, and my mom talked about reading this in school and really liking it, and so it was a way to connect with her reading life as well and to be able to talk about this book. I feel like as a theater major, the musical should have played more into it than it ever did. I don't know that I've actually ever listened to the entire cast recording from the Scarlet Pimpernel musical. However, I love vampires and I love the Scarlet Pimpernel, and the Scarlet Pimpernel actually features in my reading history too, in the sense that my very, very first Kindle that I got when I was in college, back in the days when you could download classics for free, I was kind of sticker shocked by that a couple of years ago when I went to reread Persuasion for the Netflix movie, because I had downloaded a whole bunch of classics back in like 2013 and before, like 2011 to 2013. In mass. So I had kind of a stockpile of the classics I was actively reading or interested in, but I hadn't downloaded Persuasion because I'd already had a physical copy of it, but my physical copy lives in my childhood bedroom. So I went to download a free copy and realized that they are no longer free. However, one of the Scarlet Pimpernel sequels was the first thing that I downloaded to my brand new Kindle, because it was free partially. I think The Raven Boys was the first thing I paid for. However, I downloaded it and I didn't realize at the time that it wasn't actually the immediate sequel to The Scarlet Pimpernel, but a collection of short stories that was basically a bunch of the hijinks of the Pimpernel and the Collective rescuing aristocrats. And so it was a lot of mad capers. And it feels like this sequel that, again, I have not read the first of, is going to be following a similar theme, not in terms of being a bunch of different stories, but following the madcap adventures of this group. So I am very excited. I want to see, of course, how vampires kind of tie into this world. That is another theme I think we're going to see this month, is not just vampires, but the kind of full spectrum of vampires. There are books later in the month too that we are going to talk about, obviously, maybe, that I think get at this kind of bridge between like the dark and gothic vampire, which I love, but then also like this lighter kind of comedic approach to a vampire in some ways, like that light paranormal that, again, we saw a lot in the 2000s as well, and I will touch on that more later because I'm already kind of dangerously inching into the territory of talking too much, even with this more condensed list. Also from the third, we have Creation Lake by Rachel Kushner, which is notable in that it has been longlisted for the Booker Prize and that it is a new book from the author of The Mars Room. Now, that book was also incredibly well received when it came out. I think it may have been longlisted for awards as well. I read it via audio. I admittedly cannot tell you a whole lot about it now, but this book looks incredibly interesting in that it feels kind of thriller-esque, but like a political thriller, and involves kind of a woman infiltrating a collective and how she thinks she is pulling the strings, but there is a mysterious entity kind of communicating with this collective, and whether they may be in fact the ones pulling the string or the one pulling the string. And it is specifically about an American woman who is infiltrating an anarchist collective in France. And so there is a part of me that is like, is this going to be a more literary alias? Maybe, but it is already on the list for some awards. It sounds intriguing, and also how these kinds of groups, I mean, I don't know the intentions of the group in this book, but when we're thinking of cults, many start with good intentions, and then those intentions are corrupted often by the leader, obviously, but the people that are coming in do not see that angle at first. So there is a lot to unpack here, and I'm sure that that is partially why this is up for a Booker. Also because the blurb mentions, written in short vaulting sections, Rachel Kushner's rendition of noir is taut and dazzling. So I'm very interested in what kind of language we're looking at here, and I think the kind of language really factors into an award like the Booker as well. And then we have, I believe, a young adult. I am 97% sure a young adult. Immortal Dark by Tigist Germa, which seems to be a kind of blend of dark academia and vampires, which I think are the two hottest kind of gothic, dark, fall-esque explorations of this publishing season, so we'll see how that plays out. But to quote the tagline of the blurb, it says, "A lost heiress must infiltrate an arcane society and live with the vampire she suspects killed her family and kidnapped her sister." And arcane society is such a tantalizing phrase, and not just because I loved the Amanda Quick, Jane Ann Krentz romances so much back in the 2000s, but it's very evocative. And so I'm very interested in this because we're talking about an arcane society and the kind of dark academia over kind of lay, but it also feels very gothic, and maybe that too. I think that dark academia and the gothic really go hand in hand, and I think that that is part of the appeal as well. But I'm also interested in the vampire angle of this because it does feel like it is in a kind of fantasy universe, in that kind of just to the right of our world kind of fantasy, like similar maybe, again, because I haven't read this yet, to what the world of A Study in Drowning looked like last year from Ava Reid. But the way that vampires function, and I think we're going to be seeing this throughout the vampire fiction the next couple of months, and kind of looking at what people are drawn to inherently in vampire fiction, and that there are kind of multiple angles to that. You have something like this, which feels reminiscent in some ways to Alexis Henderson's House of Hunger in terms of tone that is being kind of invoked in this blurb, but that, while not kind of overtly about vampires, is kind of similar thematic explorations in terms of desire and control and the seductive nature and what all of that metaphorically can stand in for and represents, and that side of vampires, which is of course part of the appeal. But then we also have another side that something like this kind of removes from the table, in that for me, which I mentioned in my The Foxwife video as well, I also really enjoy vampires for their kind of connection to history and the way that it's almost kind of like time travel in a way in that sense. And I really like old vampires, like we saw in Thirst earlier this year. And so something like this kind of takes that piece of the puzzle away. And I have a sneaky suspicion that we're going to be seeing a lot more of that kind of exploration for both the kind of atmosphere that it invokes and the popularity of dark academia in the current reading landscape. So kind of fitting this popular trope into the kind of current reading atmosphere, but also, where was my other thought? I found it. Not just that gothic atmosphere, but the popularity of especially romantasy right now. And so this allows the vampire phenomenon to be explored through that genre or subgenre lens as well. And so I'll be very interested to see how vampires are presenting themselves through fiction in this current iteration of vampire stories. And then we have Us in Ruins by Rachel Moore, who is the author of The Library of Shadows from last year, which is still on my TBR. So let me know if you read it and I need to bump that up amidst all of the other books, because I was very interested in that. And this also seems to be a kind of young adult fantasy romance that has some of those kind of historical ties, similar to how we talk about vampires exploring kind of different eras and being time travel in a way. This time we have a young woman who is after a historical vase that hasn't been seen in centuries, maybe? It hasn't been seen since 1932, so not centuries, but the vase is centuries old. And so this student is going on an expedition to hopefully uncover this vase, but she has a journal from a lost explorer that seems to align with this search and is an advantage to her. But in reading this journal, she becomes enamored of this lost explorer and feels like she really knows him, and there is an intimacy in reading his inner thoughts. And then when she is on this expedition, she encounters a statue that looks mysteriously like this lost explorer. And when that statue comes to life, so there we've got those links to centuries past or times past, she is faced with the reality of this person she thought she got to know through these journals, which is vastly different than how she imagined him. And so reconciling that while they are both still on the hunt for this vase, and what exactly that is going to mean. And so this seems like it's going to be adventurous and romantic, and I do love that it is offering us these standalones that still have these fantastical elements in a landscape where there are a lot of series. And I love a series, don't get me wrong, but it's nice to have options. And then last for the third, veering a sharp left, but hopefully something you will see more about in the future, we have Malort, The Redemption of a Revered and Reviled Spirit by Josh Noel. Now, if you have no clue what Malort is, you may have been introduced to it during the DNC coverage when Governor J.B. Pritzker was allowing all of the kind of correspondence that he encountered to take a shot of Malort with him. And in Chicago, though I admittedly am a transplant, so take everything with a grain of salt, Malort is almost kind of a hazing ritual in some ways, and I went almost a decade before I had my first shot of Malort, just this year actually, and it was the moment that my friends knew it was time to leave the bar because I just drank it. That being said, I can't promise that will always be my interaction with Malort. I have lived in fear of that liquor for years. I got very competitive the one time I went to bar trivia just because I didn't want to have to drink the Malort shot, even as my friend was telling me, Melody, you know they can't make you drink the Malort shot, right? But it felt like a matter of honor and principle. So out of the University of Chicago Press, which is very fitting, we are getting a history of this spirit. And I'm very interested in it as well because it feels like it kind of came back. It feels very hipster in a way. And I'm very interested in what the history is for this. So I actually have a couple copies of this pre-ordered at my local indie to pick up on Tuesday for me. so that I can get a better idea. Also, if you have connections to Chicago in any way, it could be either a fun conversation starter book or a fun present. Moving on to September 10th, the first book is The Witch of Colchis by Rosie Hewitt, which is a reimagining of Medea in the tradition of things like Circe. Now, I know historically I have said that I have kind of tired of some of these reimaginings and that I want them to have something new to say or a unique perspective to bring to the table. However, I have not read Hewlett yet, and I have hopes for this, especially for a character like Medea, which admittedly taking this on is a big endeavor because Medea is such a character. Now, she of course exists in legend through myths like the Golden Fleece, but as someone with a theater degree, I am most familiar with her story through the play, and that play does not paint Medea in the best light. And so I am very interested in this reclaiming of Medea and her story, and similar in some ways to the character of Lady Macbeth. Medea and Lady Macbeth exist very similarly, I think, in the canon for actresses in terms of these larger-than-life, powerful women that have this dangerous streak to them and how they are perceived by society and what their motivations are and how they operate within the world. And to quote Lady Macbeth a little bit, though I'm sure a bastardized version of it, so please forgive me, the unsexing in some ways. And so looking at that. So very interested in these two in conversation in some ways, but interested to see what this perspective of Medea is going to be. Now, I have been burned by some of these retellings in recent memory, but I remain hopeful. Next, we have another nonfiction, though this time with more of that angle of societal and cultural analysis that I really love. Shame on You, How to Be a Woman in the Age of Mortification by Melissa Petro, and the blurb compares it both to Rebecca Traister's Good and Mad and Roxane Gay's Bad Feminist, and there's also a quote at the end from Gia Tolentino, and all of these women, I have really enjoyed their books and collections of essays exploring that same kind of crux of thought, though this obviously seems to be more focused into one angle. And I'm very interested in this angle, especially when we think about social media and how unforgiving it can be to women. I'm also very interested in this book because it seems like it's going to be approaching this topic from a bunch of different angles and perspectives of thought, and I am very interested to see how it all comes together. Next, a release that gave me a small panic this month being August, except it's not this month, it's the 1st of September. Last month, when I accidentally wrote down a release day or a book stop for the wrong month, and I thought that it came out a month earlier than it actually came out and that I missed it in the August anticipated video, but I didn't. It comes out this month, though that's not saying much because I have had instances in the past where I pull a release date for a book from either Goodreads or Edelweiss for this video, and then it ends up coming out later, and I look very silly, but no one said anything yet. So it seems like you are all very understanding, and I appreciate that. Lucy Undying by Kristen White, which is and has been talked about as a Bride of Dracula kind of exploration, and this then of course is bringing in that historical element to the vampires that we talked about earlier, in that we have this bride or wife of Dracula who has escaped and is finding her own identity, and then it pulls us into the present where Lucy meets Iris, whose family owns a health-related empire that has something sinister lurking in the background. So it very much makes me think of a lot of those books that we've been reading about wellness culture with a sinister side the last couple of years, books like Rouge and Natural Beauty. So very much in my wheelhouse in that angle, or from that angle as well. But then Dracula comes back into the picture. This has been getting a lot of buzz already, both between the fact that it is vampires and associated with Dracula, as well as the fact that it is Kiersten White, who is a big name in young adult fiction. So I am very interested to see what this is. Finally, for the 10th, and circling back to that time travel thing, we have The Light Between Worlds by Elaine Chu, which is following two people in separate centuries who are connected through letters, though they may be digital letters, not completely clear. So in some ways, though vastly different, it may be of interest for people who enjoyed This Is How You Lose the Time War for that kind of speculative angle. And so as one of the timelines is set in 1920 Singapore, it does look like it's going to be exploring a lot of that history, especially with the colonialism in Singapore. And so it definitely seems like it's going to have this romance and this romantic element, but as a kind of vehicle to explore these characters' lives, the history that they're operating within. And so I think the speculative angle is also going to be incredibly important here. And I do have the sense based on the blurb that it's going to be written in a literary style. So I'm very interested in this one because I love anything that kind of brushes against time travel, and I'm very excited for an exploration and a use of time travel that is outside of Western history as well. Also, if you have more time travel recommendations, leave those below in general, or time travel outside of Western history especially, as I can feel like the itch for some more time travel narratives coming back. With that, we are moving on to the releases for September 17th, and before you give me too much credit for staying a little bit more on task today, because I don't know that I am, these next 2 Tuesdays are going to be the more concentrated publishing release days for the month. And it feels only fitting to start with maybe my most anticipated for the month, maybe my most anticipated for the year. That sounds like a very high order. I don't want to speak too definitively, but definitely one of my most anticipated for the year, A Sunny Place for Shady People by Mariana Enriquez. Now, if you spend any amount of time here, you know I don't shut up about Mariana Enriquez, and I am so excited to have another short story collection from her. This is again translated by Megan McDowell, and I'm very interested to see how this is going to position against her previous collections, Things We Lost in the Fire and The Dangers of Smoking in Bed, as those two feel kind of inverse of each other in some ways, as I explored particularly in my Feature Friday for The Dangers of Smoking in Bed many moons ago. But I think I kind of encapsulated it or described it as one feeling like the haunted in the everyday, and the other feeling like the everyday in the haunted. And so the way that the supernatural presents in these stories is so special, and I just love the voice of these. They're haunted, they're dangerous, but they have this real sharpness and sense of humans and humanity that is unrelenting, but at the same time forgiving, and I just don't know how to fully articulate it, and hopefully I will have some more thoughts after this collection, but I'm very interested to see how it kind of slots in to the rest of her body of work, especially in relation to the short stories. Of course, last year's Our Share of Night, well, last year's in English, which was my favorite book of the year, that's not a surprise. That is a beast into itself in terms of the scope of that, and that book does connect back to one of the short stories in Things We Lost in the Fire in a really delightful way. You don't have to have read that short story to understand the book, or you're not missing anything, but it was a nice little surprise as a reader when I picked that up. I was like, wait a minute, this reminds me of one of my favorite short stories from that first collection. Again, we are knocking it out of the park in the title department of this collection. I love all of the titles of her short story collections, but A Sunny Place for Shady People, there is just something so good about that, and I think it is in the running to be my favorite at this point. It is the front runner before I have read any of the stories therein, but I am so excited to dive into these. Back on the 3rd, I mentioned how there are some vampire books coming out this month that remind me of some of the lighter vampire books from the 2000s, and one of those titles is My Vampire Plus One by Jenna Levine. I have not read the book that came out last year, or her title that came out last year, My Vampire Roommate, yet, though I'm pretty sure it is set in Chicago, which makes sense because we have really long nights in the winter. And so I'm excited to jump into this one, and this, without having read it yet, kind of makes me think particularly of the Undead and Unwed series, which I think I've mentioned before, or even maybe the Sookie Stackhouse books. Now, I know those get darker, and I only watched the first couple of seasons of True Blood, but I think it is important to emphasize, and many of you probably know because you were probably reading the Sookie Stackhouse books when they came out like I was, that the tone of those books is much different than the show. The show gets very dark, and it's not that the books are not dark or don't deal with heavy things. They are still vampires. There are battles, there's epicness, but at the end of the day, they almost kind of reset into these capsule things. And I've joked before, and I'm sure I will joke again, that Sookie kind of forgets everything she has learned from book to book, and we kind of restart with her as this woman who just likes to do the crossword and take her library books back to the library, which I can appreciate, but it's different tonally in many ways. So this series seems like it is the current paranormal romance answer to that genre of vampire books, and involves fake dating for a wedding with a vampire, and things get a little steamy. I tried to think of a vampire pun, but apparently they only come to me when I'm not trying. And then, because this may be the best release day for me for the entire year, one of my auto-buy authors and a book I already have a signed copy pre-ordered of for An Academy for Liars by Alexis Henderson, which is her newest New World, this time a dark academia exploration of a girl who is invited to this mysterious school, university, because of her power of persuasion. And so everyone at the college has this power, and our protagonist Lennon is learning how to hone it, partially under the tutelage of her, according to the blurb, enigmatic advisor Dante. And Dante as a name obviously kind of invokes a lot of things, including trials, so we'll see if that comes into play. But the idea seems to be, will she control the power, or will the power consume her? And as Henderson already has a stellar track record with gothic atmospheres from the likes of The Year of the Witching and House of Hunger, books back to The Year of the Witching that already made her an auto-buy author for me, I am very interested to see how that is going to translate to dark academia, because I think she is perfectly primed to enter that space and to add these extra layers of kind of consideration and commentary on top of the atmosphere that she already does so well. So I'm very excited for the genre elements as well as the kind of deeper meanings and considerations that I know are going to be behind it while on this very fast-paced, well-written ride. So needless to say, I'm going to be very, very excited for my copy of this to arrive. Next, we have a book that I had to double check multiple times to make sure it wasn't coming out or didn't come out last year, because I feel like I've seen this cover so much, and there is a part of me that is still not convinced that I didn't miss it somewhere. But A Dark and Drowning Tide by Allison Saft is supposedly coming out on September 17th. And this follows a folklorist, Lorelei, who is on an expedition with her mentor and a group of others, including her academic rival, to discover a fabled spring when her mentor is murdered, and she can no longer trust anyone in the party except her rival as the new leader of this party. And to top it all off, because they are on this expedition, they are in the middle of the woods, which we know is a liminal space. And so we've got these elements of the mythical and the fantastical within the woods and what they are going to be stumbling upon. We've got this murder mystery angle and the idea that they can't trust anyone in their party. We've got this sapphic romance angle as these two are pulled closer together by the fact that they are the only two within the party that they can trust. So there's a lot working in favor of this one as well. And we know how much I love a good book set in the woods and the liminal space of the woods. So very promising. Next, circling back to the genre or subgenre, particularly of horror, the last couple of years that's really interrogating our kind of twisted beauty and wellness culture, we have Snake Oil by Kelsey Ray Dimberg, which is an exploration more of the wellness side, it seems, and is looking at a particular wellness company through the lens of 3 women operating within the company. The founder of the company, someone that is pulled into the founder's inner circle, and someone on the customer support team that is secretly at night running, I believe, a Twitter account or something equivalent that is exposing the company and kind of undermining what is going on. And the way, according to the blurb, that these 3 storylines come to a head one night when tragedy strikes a company party. So as you probably know, I am very interested in the books exploring this right now. Like I mentioned earlier, things like Natural Beauty, things like Rouge, things like The Glow, this kind of darker side to wellness and beauty culture, and the way that that is explored through literary fiction, or has been explored through literary fiction, especially the last couple of years, I think has been excellently done. The just sinister kind of underbelly. And here we are really naming the thing that is kind of at the heart of everything, the snake oil of it all. This genre of books goes out to every influencer who has tried to sell you a miracle cure, and I think in that way is really an interesting way to attack the kind of modern zeitgeist, because we talk a lot, or at least some, about the way that fiction can feel dated and the way that social media platforms kind of move so quickly, and we move from platform to platform relatively quickly in relation to kind of looking at the narrative life cycle and how long it takes to produce fiction, or at least how long it used to. We can talk about that angle another day, but I think it's a really interesting way to kind of explore the kind of thematic problem at hand and invoke a lot of the things. Like, I remember in The Glow, things like Instagram were mentioned, but it wasn't the center of the book. So it's a way to explore online culture and influencer culture without it feeling as dated. At the same time, I'm still really interested in looking at how we can present the online on page as well, in a similar way to how I'm interested in how online exists on stage and the theatricality of that, and how we can invoke that in a space, and how the page and the kind of format of a thing can invoke that. Part of the reason I think the Goon Squad was so popular all of those years ago, and at the very least continues to be popular enough to make the New York Times Best Books of the Century list. So yeah, just some thought tangents there, but of note, and tell me what you think of that particular subgenre of fiction that we've been experiencing recently below, or if you have any particular recommendations. I know that there are a number of books that are exploring similar things that I haven't even gotten to yet that are on my radar, but feel free to mention those below as well, both to remind me and anyone else watching what those titles are. Moving on, we have Buried Deep and Other Stories, which is a short story collection from Naomi Novik, who is a very popular fantasy author. This does look of interest to me. Short stories are very of interest to me in the fall and in September as well. I don't know if we'll get to another short story September this year or not, but it is always something kind of in the back of my mind. The only thing that kind of gives me pause here is that it does look like there is a short story set in the Scholomance universe, and I only read the first of that series. I didn't particularly like it. You can make a case to me below if you think I should go back to that series, but I did have trouble with that first book narratively, to be completely honest. But I do like Novik's voice, or have enjoyed her voice in other works, and it does seem like in this collection she's going to be pulling on or invoking some more popular characters or known characters. The blurb specifically mentions Mark Antony, Sherlock Holmes, and Elizabeth Bennet, as well as just more kind of fantasy visuals. And it does, I believe, mention that it is also going to be introducing the world of her next big project. So that's intriguing, and an intriguing way to think about introducing a new project. And did the project grow out of the short story, similar to the way that it seems like, and again, I haven't really gone back to kind of trace things or look into the inception of Our Share of Night, kind of grew out of the short story Adela's House from Things We Lost in the Fire? I don't know. So of interest, and if you are looking for some fun, fantastical short stories and things that exist in that fantastical realm that may not be as overtly horror as something like A Sunny Place for Shady People, this may be more up your alley, though I would argue, without having read it, that A Sunny Place for Shady People could be up everybody's alley as well. However, there was that one story in The Dangers of Smoking in Bed about, or set on, Las Ramblas, and may have actually been titled Las Ramblas, that did give me nightmares a little bit, so who knows. Next we have Rewitched by Lucy Jane Wood, which seems to be a cozy fantasy romance, or at least it seems like there are romantic leanings, and it's following Belle, who is attempting to prove her worthiness and her magic, or risk losing it forever, amidst more mundane things like dealing with her toxic boss at the bookstore she loves. And there may be a handsome watch Watchmen thrown in for good measure. It's invoking, or at least the blurb is invoking for me, something similar to A Very Secret Society of Irregular Witches, and I know that there are a lot of readers that are looking for things along those lines. And I did look up because I got paranoid again. I was sure the next Sangu Mandana came out this fall, but it looks like it either has always come out next April or it was pushed to April. If anyone has more knowledge about that, because I clearly missed something, let me know. But in the interim, this does look like it will be up the alley for people that are looking for cozier fantasies, though I don't know. The cover is definitely invoking cozy. I don't know what kind of dangerous forces we are kind of going up against in this book, how high stakes that is, though there are high stakes still in A Very Secret Society of Irregular Witches. It's just the feel and the community in that book that is so special. And so hopefully this will fill that void for a lot of readers or give us another author and world to explore. Finally, for the 17th, and just in time for my vacation to Tokyo, we have The Lantern of Lost Memories by Sanaka Hirami and translated by Jessie Kirkwood, which seems to be exploring another liminal space, so definitely part of why I'm drawn to this, and a photo studio that sits between life and the afterlife, where those kind of moving into the afterlife are allowed or revisit their life and are allowed to take a memory with them. And so I'm just very interested. It seems set up to be very episodic, and it's interesting because a lot of the Japanese literature that it seems like has come on my radar this year, especially through new releases, feels like it has a very episodic nature. I think the book that came out in August felt very similar in that way in terms of this character study or these short bursts of character study. So I'm going to be very interested to see if that's the case when actually reading them, and hopefully all of these titles will be on my vacation TBR, which we may finalize more concretely later this month because I'm going to have to get them all on my Kobo at some point. Which finally brings us to the last new release Tuesday of the month, September 24th, starting with an anticipated novella from ML Rio, the author of If We Are Villains, one of the most popular dark academia novels, though I will admit to you, I admit a lot of things in this space, don't I? I have not read If We Were Villains yet, but Graveyard Shift by ML Rio is following a group of workers who all work the night shift. So this is following the lives of 5 people as they kind of cross paths over the course of their night shift or their graveyard shifts, when one night they discover a very literal grave and have to try to get to the bottom of what is going on. And so there is obviously that kind of gothic mystery element there, the kind of tinges of dark academia that may be more at the forefront in the actual book, I don't know yet, or novella, I should say, based on the 144 pages. But one of the aspects that I'm really enjoying or intrigued by in the blurb as well is the idea that these are everyday people. And so I think sometimes there is romanticization of the characters in dark academia as well, which makes sense. I love romanticized characters. It's escapism. But I'm intrigued by how these people are going to be presented and what world they're going to be drawn in. And just this idea that those who work the late shift, your bartenders, your rideshare drivers, your receptionists, and your cleaning service crew see potentially an entirely different world after hours than is seen during the day. And I love that kind of exploration and the shades of that as well. So very interested to see what this is. And then we move in to TikTok books, or books by TikTokers. Now, this has exploded this year. This really has been the year of the books by TikTokers. I don't think I have mentioned a whole lot of them over the course of the year yet. This is the first one that I haven't named yet, I know, that has really kind of sparked my interest or really come strong onto my radar. Now, I was a bookseller during the YouTuber book fad, or the kind of influx of books by YouTubers. And at the time, I didn't actually watch much YouTube, so I didn't understand these entities and I didn't understand YouTubers and YouTuber culture. And so I was very interested in it because it kind of exploded. But a lot of those books weren't particularly substantive. But if you have a shtick you can riff on, especially in a pithy kind of short form comedic format, why not? Which brings us to the book I am anticipating, How to Piss Off Men, 106 Things to Say to Shatter the Male Ego by Kyle Prue. Kyle Prue is, I wanted to say obviously, but it's not obvious if you don't have TikTok, is a TikToker notorious for his series Things to Say to Piss Off Men, and they are, at least to me, very funny. And I don't just say that because he also speaks in Angels in America references every once in a while. And yes, there is a lot of privilege in him being able to make these jokes, but that is part of the appeal, I think, too, in that as a viewer, I feel seen by the jokes, and it feels nice to know that he sees it too. So I think that this will just be a fun joke book of sorts, and I'm very interested to see if it's going to have new material or if it's just going to be regurgitations of what we have already seen on TikTok. And in some ways, I am kind of split, because as a person who follows him on TikTok, I would like to see new material, but at the same time, for wider audiences who have not encountered him on TikTok, that will be new material, and so it's getting that material out to a wider audience. So I could go either way on this one. I will be interested to see which way the book itself goes, though. Next, we have The Village Library Demon Hunting Society by C.M. Wagner, which is described as Murder, She Wrote meets Buffy the Vampire Slayer, and seems to be a kind of cozy, fantastical murder mystery series involving a possessed cat at one point in the book. But according to the blurb, librarian Sherry keeps finding dead bodies and solving mysteries, and is wondering why no one else in the town is concerned about all of these dead bodies, and there are supernatural potential answers to why there are all of these dead bodies. And thus, a town librarian and amateur sleuth becomes part of a demon hunting society. Though I'm sure the cat, Lord Thomas Cromwell, will be fine, and I am anxiously anticipating an explanation of why the cat is named after Thomas Cromwell, though it may just be librarian reasons. And then we have probably the most anticipated book of the month, the book that you will see far and wide across your Instagram feed if your algorithm is in fact still working. Some days I don't know that mine is. Intermezzo by Sally Rooney. This book seems to be following two brothers, Peter and Ivan, who are vastly different, but both are left wheeling in the wake of the loss of their mother, and both are trying to reconcile the relationships in their lives. It seems like it really is going to be focused, as Rooney's work has been focused, on those interpersonal dynamics, the kind of millennial experience and those interconnections. It does feel of note that both of the protagonists and the central drivers of this book are both men. I don't know if we're going to get alternative perspectives because I do not have an advanced reader copy of this book, but in books past or in Rooney's canon, there are usually very strong female perspectives in these books, and that perspective has always been so valuable to me as a reader. So I'm very interested to see what this is going to be from this new perspective. I'm not saying she doesn't have the male perspective in her fiction, but that I have always felt particularly seen as a woman in her fiction. And so if we are coming at it from a different angle, I'm really interested to see what that is going to bring to the table, but also kind of honoring this stage of life where it feels like these two characters are going to be feeling very lost and confused. And we have one brother who presents as more traditionally successful. I don't know if that's his reality, but that is how it seems anyway, at least according to the blurb. And then the other brother who is a competitive chess player, which is how the cover art comes into play here, presumably, and the kind of maneuverings in the chess game of interpersonal relationships, I think is going to be a very interesting perspective to bring to the table. And I'm really interested to see how that fits in narratively here. Next, we have Wrath of the Triple Goddess by Rick Riordan, which is the latest Percy Jackson book in this newest series. And a reminder that I need to actually swing back and catch back up with this newest series, as well as I don't think I finished the Rome series. I've got work to do. But this time we are following Percy, Annabeth, and Grover in wake of a pet sitting opportunity gone awry and the mission that ensues after some of these pets get out, because after all, Percy still needs a letter of recommendation to college, which is funny because I actually first read the Percy Jackson books after I graduated college. And then we have The 13th Child by Aaron A. Craig, who is the author of House of Salt and Sorrow, which is a retelling, The 13th Child, not The House of Salt and Sorrow, is a retelling of Godfather Death, which is a fairy tale and a Grimm's fairy tale that I personally am not familiar with or have not read. So we're going into the deep cut fairy tales here. And so in getting into the deeper cut fairy tales, we are following Hazel, who is the 13th child, and as the 13th child, she has been promised to essentially this world's death, because this does seem like it is a fantastical world. And what this entails for her is she is gifted with the ability to see what someone needs and to be able to heal them. So to be able to determine what will heal someone. But the other side of that is when there is no cure, Hazel is tasked with ending their suffering. And Hazel ends up at court where she gets to know a prince. However, she sees the ailing king and learns through her power that there is no hope there. And so she is faced with the conflict of what she is meant to do and what she wants to do. Based on, granted, I've only read one other book by this author, but that book had a lot of the kind of Gothic touchstones of especially Grimm fairy tales that translate so well. And so I expect similar from this in terms of the tone and the atmosphere, and I'm very intrigued, and a little intrigued as well, of course, by the potential romantic subplots here that are kind of hinted at in this blurb, but we will see what we get. Though last for the month, we have a title where the romantic subplots are not going to be subplots, or at least I hope not, based on the fact that it is a genre romance. We have The Trouble with Inventing a Viscount by Vivian Loret, which is the second in the Liars Club series. I have not yet started this series, but this is following a young woman, Honoria, who has a long-standing engagement to a missing Viscount. And the title is due to go extinct because this Viscount has been missing for so long. And Honoria is willing to go to great lengths, even inventing the Viscount herself, in order to keep the idea of this Viscount alive. This is where, according to the blurb, a first-rate gambler, Oscar Flint, comes in. Now, I am a little confused based on the blurb on whose idea it is for him to impersonate the Viscount. Whether there was a wager that these two were engaged in at some point, and I probably would know better if I'd read the first book, wouldn't I? That he lost, and this is kind of him taking a little bit back in some ways, getting an upper hand and kind of throwing her off balance for romance reasons, or whether she started this charade in order to keep the Viscount alive and to gain power, presumably in that way, and things get a little out of hand. I am interested to see exactly how that dynamic comes into play. But regardless of how it started, we have a man pretending to be the missing Viscount and an attraction that becomes more impossible to deny with every day. I think that, yeah, that sounds right. Anyway, it's romance, it's historical romance, seemingly a little bit more outside the bounds of the ballroom this go around, and I am intrigued by what we get here. And with that, that is what I have on my radar for September. So again, I would love to hear what you have on your radar, and I'm very grateful to you for sticking with me through the entire month in listening to my thoughts about these books I have not read yet. So let me know, again, what you're excited about below. Thank you for hanging out. Like and subscribe if you feel like it. Read something good. I think we've covered everything we need to cover for now. It feels like a very abrupt ending, but I've already taken so much of your time. So yeah,